Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of you for your service and your interest in space and your testimony here today. So many questions and so little time, really, to get through them. The $64,000 question, 64 million, billion, whatever question, is how we get a consistent plan, a consistent funding level to Congress after Congress, administration after administration. You're familiar with the dozens of missions to nowhere, and we're afraid that we'll see more and more of these. You remember the ISS survived just by one vote, funding for the ISS at one time. And another approach that bears a lot of sense is the X Prize approach. And since there's really no good business model for exploring space, the X Prize process gives a lot of encouragement to that, obviously, a lot of encouragement to private investment, technology development, risk. And I wonder if you have considered that process as well, and what you might think the dollar amounts might be or the milestones might be. I mean, we can have NASA maybe design a car to make 3 laps around the horseshoe out in front of this building, and by the time they're finished, it could be a $5 million car. We can say the first person that could design a car to make 5 laps around that building gets $1 million, and it'd be done in 5 minutes by private industry, and we'd save a lot of money and have what we want to develop for us already. It's been said by experts, the Wright brothers would have never flown if they had to put up with FAA, and I'm afraid that goes for a lot of space entrepreneurs. This is a very difficult country to do business in, and you have to take your hat off and respect any of them that choose to do business here with the overregulation and the red tape that we foist upon our space industry while other governments subsidize theirs. We hassle ours. So your thoughts on that?
I think you go.
Thank you, Congressman. We didn't talk about the X Prize, or again, we didn't talk about specific commercial approaches because it wasn't part of our task statement or charge. But I do want to point out that we, in the approach that we developed, the Pathways approach, leave the door wide open for commercial innovation in the stepping stones that would lead us ultimately to Mars. And again, I'll quote from the Pathways principles that we developed in our report. Number 4 is to seek continuously to engage new partners that can solve technical and or programmatic impediments to pathway progress. And those partners can be governmental, they could be international, and they could be commercial as well. And without that flexibility, certainly any pathway approach is not going to be very not going to be optimal. We have to be able to involve whatever new ideas and creative approaches that can be brought to bear on such a difficult problem as landing on Mars. Now, the question of how to encourage commercial endeavors, again, it's beyond the committee, and I don't feel particularly qualified to say anything about that. I will say, though, that the overall problem of sending humans to Mars and landing them on Mars, even through this stepping stone approach where you do this in progressive steps that are manageable enough that there's a reasonable chance of success for each one, is such a huge endeavor that it must involve the U.S. government as the primary mover of this whole endeavor, just because of the size and scope. And within the context of that, this committee believes there is ample room for commercial and international involvement. Even it's essential for that involvement.
Thank you. Governor?
Nothing to add. I think that's
right. And Governor, you've seen one administration after another deal with one House and one Senate after another. Right. What do you think the common denominator might be to tie this together? We're all searching for that continuity. Everybody, no matter what direction they're coming from in space, said, hey, you need to have a plan. You all need to stick to a plan, and it needs to be a long-range plan, not plan du jour. You know, it needs to be a long-range plan, and we just can't find that glue that will tie that together.
You put your finger, of course, on the central dilemma. I said in the opening, our report says in almost the same words that we recognize that calling for an approach like this flies in the face of everything back to the 70s, I suppose. Yeah. But we also say that if it seems unrealistic to believe that that sort of unity and that sort of continuity could be brought off in our system, then you might as well face up that Mars itself is unrealistic. Yeah. Now, I'm going to engage in some wild wishful thinking here. But I do think, and it was reflected in comments that the ranking member made earlier and others did, at least in theory, this could be one of those subjects that we certainly need more of in this country, on which people who disagree strongly and sincerely about other things could agree, particularly if folks accept the reality that if we're going there at all, it's going to have to be on this base. We're going to have to hold hands, not just in the first Congress that agrees to it, but that's got to be transmitted somehow to those who follow. And yes, that's not the natural state of affairs. But this is not like any other endeavor that I can think of that government or the private sector, for that matter, attempts to bring off. And well, so I appreciate your question. I think it is, in some respects, the ultimate question here. And forgive me for indulging in the thought that maybe it could all start right here.
Well, you know, that we would like to see that. It just seems like anything short of getting America out of the mall for 15 minutes and away from Dancing with the Stars for 15 minutes, and let Neil deGrasse Tyson talk to each one of them for 15 minutes. You know, we could probably pass a constitutional amendment to fund that. But, you know, I see my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.